Today, we're talking about making changes and if it's even possible. Lifelong habits and not knowing how to process trauma. I didn't grow up learning how to process anything, any type of trauma. And throughout my life, especially coming out of the military, I gave into a bunch of different poor coping mechanisms. I cut you off, Brian. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. No, I was just saying that I was in the Marine Corps, spent 5 years there. When I got out, I had a real hard time reintegrating myself. You know, when you're in Iraq, everyone's wearing the uniform or you're not wearing the uniform. So it's real easy to delineate whose side everyone's on. But when you get home, you take the uniform off and it gets real hard to figure out whose side everyone's on. So as a result, I just kind of constantly felt like I was surrounded by people that were dangerous or a threat. And I think for me, the point I would make there is what I began to realize was that I came from a family that never properly taught me how to process trauma. In fact, what they would do is if something traumatic happened, they would normally minimize it. And my dad would give me, you know, some example of a relative who'd fought in World War II and everything he'd been through. So what you're going through can't be that big of a deal. So I think for me, initially, what one of the big realizations was that I just simply didn't know how to process trauma. That's why I was spending all my time trying to avoid it. Why I was drinking at night to try to, you know, not spend time with intrusive thoughts that I didn't want to have, you know. And so if you don't know how to embrace those thoughts and how to put them in the right place, it can be a pretty terrifying event. You know, we were just talking about the concept of yoga and trauma survivors, you know, how trauma survivors may struggle with yoga just because the idea of being present and just sitting with yourself and your thoughts could be the very thing that they're trying to avoid. So I think that's probably where we start off. It's just an understanding that there's a lot of people out there, and I think it's actually pretty common. I don't think we're very honest with ourselves, who just simply don't know how to process trauma. And the reason that they don't know how to process trauma is they come from families that very likely don't know how to process trauma. And so you spend a lot of your life trying to minimize the thing that you've been through, but that makes you miserable, you know, because obviously it was serious enough and it obviously needs your attention and you need to understand what happened. But I mean, the truth of it is we only know what we know. And when we come from homes that don't model good behaviors, that don't model or don't show us how to take, you know, these traumatic experiences and make sense of them, or, you know, learn the lesson, because there's a lesson behind each of these experiences, you end up in a place where you begin to feel pretty disenfranchised and pretty disillusioned. You know, it's like this dream life that was cast for you, that was told was possible, no longer seems to be possible. So that's kind of what we wanted to maybe talk about now, is maybe discuss the idea of trauma, and also maybe consider that for a lot of people who are struggling with PTSD, it's not like, I've heard this scenario, two guys go into a room, one guy comes out with PTSD. You know, what happened? What made it so this person has PTSD? For me, from my perspective, and from my experience, I'm now starting to realize that actually has a lot more to do with what brought them into the recruiting office rather than what happened in that room. And I found that, like, for myself, you know, I came from a pretty abusive home. And so for me, getting out of that home and getting into the military was like a process of me almost searching for an identity. And I think that's how we find a lot of veterans getting into the military. They're looking for identity. They're trying to find a place to fit in. They probably don't come from a home that gave them a lot of structure or a lot of safety or a lot of encouragement or taught them how to process trauma. And now they're looking for an identity in the military, and they get out and they're still missing out on all those formative lessons on how to process trauma, but now they have a whole bunch more trauma to process.
That's exactly the reason why I joined. I was joining to figure out myself. I was hoping to get some positive male role models. My parents divorced when I was really young, and just the process of switching back and forth which household I was at every week, I was getting in trouble because I was emulating the parents that I just left. And so I would get in trouble because I wasn't really meshing well with the home, and then I'd switch back. And then by that time I'm already acting like my mom, the way that they run things in the house. And so I'm constantly just trying to figure out who I am. And eventually it just turned into, I should just bottle everything up and keep to myself, be quiet, because that's the way I'll receive less punishments for acting strange to them. And an unfortunate thing is, like, throughout that whole time, even one house was very Christian, the other house was very just kind of like Wild West. In the Wild West home, it was very common to just, like, if you're getting in a fight, you get in an argument, there's something wrong, sit with yourself and drink. It seems to be the way to go about it. And then unfortunately, the house, my mom's house, that were just very, very Christian, very heavily in the church. There wasn't anything other than the idea of just pray, and God will take care of everything. And alongside with all of that, everything else, if you have any problems that extend past that, everyone was very hands off, and it was more of like applying shame. You're a sinner, you're being bad, you just need to pray more. And so I think that's just it's interesting how I got to see these two different homes have their own default way of, like, dealing with stuff, and they were both bad. Just one of them was using a substance, the other one was using shame, almost wielding it like a weapon. And if you're not doing better, then, well, God knows.
Well, I was gonna say, and I would wager they were probably pretty confident about their parenting styles and how they were running their homes. And the likelihood is it's because that's the only thing they've ever seen before. You know, I mean, you're probably looking at copies of the homes they came out of.
Right. And so it's just a default mode network that's just getting passed down through generations of just like
Yeah.
how to be. And that goes into the next part of our little topic is change is not always modeled by your parents.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
that's
the proper way to change yourself.
that's an important one to emphasize. I think it's really important because if you can't go back and you can't identify moments in your past where your parents took time to teach you how to deal with things like failure or trauma and do it in a healthy way that wasn't, you know, shameful, like you talked about, trying to shame you, trying to ridicule or make you feel bad as though that would be some kind of motivation for a child. If you didn't come from a home that, you know, didn't have that open and accepting environment and was, you know, willing to take time to show you how to process stuff, there's a good chance you're much like me. You didn't know how to process trauma and you have quite a bit to learn. I mean, some real good indicators that you might have come from that home is you very likely grew up with parents that have maybe refused to adapt to certain things. I think we see this with a lot of people as they get older, just like an absolute refusal to engage in technology, to learn new things, to try to improve themselves. And I think that these are things that are common in homes where you find like there's trauma and there's not much effort to improve the individual after the trauma happens, you know. As far as what to do when you find yourself in that situation, I can only speak for what worked for me. And a big thing that was really helpful for me was taking time to slow down and to begin to be critical of the lessons and the values that my parents had handed me. I grew up in a pretty typical Judeo-Christian family home in that they drank almost every night of the week, but made it to church on Sunday religiously. So, you know, it's just very performative. It's a lot of like keeping up the appearances and just looking like everything's okay, but you know, nothing's okay because nothing's getting resolved, nothing's getting processed. For me, when I started being able to look critically at the values and the traditions that I was given by my parents, it became real obvious to me that I was coming from a family that for generations had been broken and was making broken people. You know, it's kind of like when you see a family and like the father's got anxiety, the daughter's got anxiety, the daughter's got anxiety now. It's not necessarily, this is my theory, but it's not necessarily that it's anything more special than these are what the homes are producing. They're like these little pressure cookers that are making people that have anxiety. They're giving them the right kind of trauma to give them anxiety about the future and to make them worried about what's going to happen.
So I'm a little hesitant to share, but I'm going to try my best. I do believe in change, that you can grow and heal from trauma. My father brought in trauma from Vietnam so severe. I'm kind of an empathic and healer in all these modalities. And I didn't realize that it had affected me so much until maybe I hit 40, and I'm only a couple years older than that now. It really hurt me to the point where I had other traumas and that on top of it. The worst part of it was that I know that both of you have been in the military. Sometimes there's an anger from going from 1 to 10 so quickly. As a little girl, I didn't understand that. The physicalness. I will just prelude and say that I have forgiven my dad. We have a very great relationship now, but I had to ask him why. Like I sought out some of these why things. There was no coaching to deal with any sort of traumas in my household at all. I was born to two brilliant parents. They are so amazing in so many things, but it's a generational ignorance that I inherited. I am standing firmly because I'm one of 6 and I want everybody well. And it's been too long, and I'm taking all the steps, seeking and bringing the tools. Even with my own dad, I noticed that I stand firm in my vision for my wellness. I can't always take on everything, but I mention little things like, you know, please don't speak to me in that tone, or I said, or I have to call it out because I just don't think he knows. You know,
I would wager
think
that
there's
you're
a lot
right.
they just don't know. And I try to, like, I say, well, you know, like shouting, do you really think you're getting my attention that way? Or I won't be spoken to like that. I'm out of here. And just really trying to stand firm because it hurt. You know, it hurts me to leave him in that state, but he has gotten better. I'm trying all the modalities. I'm also a scientist, an educator, whole bunch of titles I hold. I'm trying to bring in whatever I can that's gentle and natural, get it to him, get it to the right people, get it to my family. I just,
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know if that's along the lines of the trauma that you're speaking of, but
Absolutely.
um, it left me in a state for a long time. I thought that I was lost. Right? Drugs, alcohol, all that abuse came for me, especially being as sensitive as I am. I've since given them up. I mean, it wasn't anything like major, maybe some grass and some light things, but alcohol, whoa, was the worst. I'm a failure at drinking. I'm just not good at it. But they were escapes. They were things that I wouldn't really understand until later that had been put there without my acceptance, just by the
Yeah.
nature of who I was born to. My mom went to heaven in September. I wish I could have brought her that last bit of awareness, but it was I had other things. She just had too many other things. But my dad is still here. He has so much longevity in his life. He's like I mentioned, he's a veteran of the Vietnam War. He has a glass eye, a shrapnel. I don't even know. I'm working on it. I'm working on it for myself so that I can heal him. Any feedback would be appreciated.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think for me, like I said, dealt with PTSD for like 15 years, just an angry, snarling dog of a man, like waiting for the person that's supposed to be like, coming after me. But I think for me, if I were to be honest in retrospect, it was my inability to be present. I was constantly remembering things that had happened, or I was constantly worried about what was going to happen, And when you have that military experience, especially with combat, those become very serious lessons. You have to take time to consider what happened and dwell on it to understand how to improve for the future. And then you've really got something to worry about because you may have another mission or something that you have to do, and it's going to be putting yourself in hazard or jeopardy. So it's really common to constantly be stuck either in the past or the future, and to just have a complete inability to be present, at least from my perspective, when you get out of the military, because the military is teaching you to constantly keep your head on the swivel and review what happened in order to be able to assess and estimate what's going to happen in the future. So there's not a lot of room to be present or happy there. It's just kind of like a constant state of survival.
I do see that a lot in his patterning and the patterns of behaviors he has.
For me, a huge tool has been meditation. Meditation is a great way to practice being present. Once you start beginning to be present, you begin to understand that things aren't that bad, that I'm not at war right now, that the war is over, and that I'm here and now, and here and now things are pretty darn good. But until you actually begin to go through that process of beginning to become present, it's just you're not going to make the connection. You have to be present in order to begin to really think, because everything else is just judgment.
Does that fall underneath like the default mode network, Brian? Just
Pretty
like
much,
having it in a certain state that doesn't serve for the time that you're in now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, habits that are no longer serving you well.
Yeah, my upbringing was very strange because my parents were very polar opposite from each other from just my point of view. And so when I was very young, I abstained from drinking, even if it was like available to me at just a young age, just like high school or like 19, 20 years old, because I would see my dad and I'd be like, that's not what I want for myself. I saw a bunch of things that I knew I didn't want to be in him. But the weird thing about it is that I did end up start drinking. I started drinking a whole lot. It was very bad for me, but that didn't really click until the military. Just everything's pumped up to 11 at all times. Just go, go, go. Everything has to be right. Everyone has to be locked on. I felt like that. And if I felt like I wasn't good enough, the shame that I was constantly used to from like my mom's way of bringing me up, like those together is what made this like freak situation in my mind that I didn't know what to do about it. So I just defaulted into drowning myself out in alcohol.
Well, it's the only thing that you were shown too. You have to keep in mind, the socio-behavioral modeling, like we just do what we see. We trick ourselves into thinking that we're really unique and we're special, but we're just copies of copies of copies. You know what I mean? And so it's like, you just have to be present. If you're not present, you're not going to pay attention, and you're just going to be doing what you did before. And it's very likely what you did before is getting you terrible results now. I mean, we grow up, we think we're rebellious, we go out and we drink and we party, but we forget excess is not rebellion, man. Like all you're doing is like consuming to excess.
Right. The interesting thing about it to me though is I was actually very resistant to drinking. And then but that's when I was living under somebody else's roof. My food was paid for, I had a place to sleep. But when I got into the real world and I had to fend for myself, that's when everything kind of collapsed back onto me. And I didn't have anything to fall back on as far as like a way to cope or even just be introspective and to understand myself, what's going on and my reaction to the situation, to have an actual plan that would serve me and that wouldn't make things worse. So changes not always modeled by your parents. Was there anything in your upbringing or even to nowadays, have you ever seen your parents make a life change in how they conduct themselves or how they address things like trauma? I don't think I could say for myself that I saw much changes in my family and my parent. Brian, did you see for at any time in your life your parents make like a positive change to how they process
My dad
anything?
stopped drinking about 15
Okay.
years ago. He was
Hmm.
about to end his third marriage, and so he decided to remove alcohol. So that was a positive change. But the thing is he still hasn't learned how to process trauma, and his attempts at sobriety have been like the white knuckle stuff. And he's
Yeah.
done it. It's good to go, but I think it speaks more to the controlling nature of his personality than to like positive growth.
I feel like it's so easy to default into obviously just the way we were brought up, but there's almost like a mental block to like the refusal to be critical of values and traditions and just how to live your life brought down by your parents. There's like a mental block almost there for me.
Well, that's the ego that's tricking you into thinking
Mm,
that you're doing everything right, that you're doing it better than everyone else is doing it. This actually kind of speaks to what you were asking a little bit. But honestly, for me, what it really came down to when I started getting healthier, when I started getting better, when I started learning how to process trauma, is it was because I simply believed that change was possible. I was just so unhappy with how my life was, and I'm looking around at other people, and it was like, I got to be different. I have to do something different. And so I just started consuming a whole bunch of different stuff than what I was doing. I stopped listening to talk radio, stopped listening to the same music I was listening to, started reading different books. I mean, I changed myself. I just like filled my life with as much change as possible. And this actually brings us to the next section you're talking about, because you were talking about trying to work with them to try to help him process some of his trauma. From what I've found out, from the work I've been doing, I've found that there's normally 3 really good approaches to trying to deal with trauma. The first one is doing a top-down approach. It's addressing the person where they are now and trying to understand and trying to help them heal and create a life that they can like be happy with and be satisfied with. The bottom-up approach is another one, and that's going back and addressing the trauma as it happened. You know what I mean? So for me, I did a bottom-up approach to addressing my trauma, and it didn't start with Iraq. I began to go back and see myself as a child and was reflecting and spending time getting new perspective or reframing my old perspective about what happened, just from some of the abuse and the trauma that I felt or that I had from my parents. Like, what would make parents do that to their kids? And as I went inward and was trying to do the bottom up approach, I began to like see the story of their parents, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. And then I would see the story of my great grandparents, and it was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. So I think it's real important. I mean, for me, the bottom up approach was the best way to go, because when I got to what I thought the bottom was, I realized that was just the beginning of my story, that I'm just a continuation of all their stories. And so it was actually going back and on a generational level, trying to understand the trauma that my family been through, because that trauma was essential to understanding how I got to where I was now. So for me, those are 2 incredibly valuable ways. The third one is medication, and medication is good for me. I mean, I was on medication for about 5 years, but it gave me the stability that I needed in order to take the time to finally say to myself, Brian, it's time to go inward and heal yourself. But I needed that 5 years of stability. Without that stability, I still would have just been like that out of control, angry person, just hyper aggressive, always looking for the fight that's going to kill me, So it's a real trip. It's hard to go there and come back and just expect everything to be normal. I can only imagine the stuff that your dad went through and what he saw. And if he lost friends, then I mean, there's a burden there, man. There's a real strong burden that they are not here and you are here, and so you put a heavy dose of responsibility on yourself with that kind of stuff. And a lot of times it's undue and damaging. I think we were going to talk about maybe some signs that you might need change. It's funny because, JK, you were sharing that story with your dad, and those are pretty good examples of
I
signs.
appreciate you guys letting me share, because it brings my awareness how to best guide and help. And you guys are giving me some ideas of some starting points. It's just time.
Yeah.
When you enlighten your life and their life, and and you're looking at each other, and
you just don't need to be living like this anymore.
I want to share something very powerful. it breaks my heart sometimes. Women were a little emotional. So if I get a little emotional, he was drafted, and he wasn't like that. He didn't go with anything. He had a great upbringing, very, great life. And he came back that way. And, and others that knew him said he had come back a different way. There was just a part of him. And when I look at him and when I interact with him, now that my mom's only gone a short while and I'm home more trying to help out, he reminds me of like a man in his early, or kind of mid 20s. There's this innocence about him that is returning slowly as I guide with my words or call him out or try. And it touches my heart to see how innocent he really is. I'm sorry, it just does, like, for so long, and it's all of his children hurt, and just to let it repair, and just to give him the opportunity to forgive it all and shift it all out of the way. And now I'm just listening in and trying to be present and get some tools from you guys so that I can be a resource to him and get some strategies, because it really, really is so deep. I want to help everybody. I want to help him, and then I want to go on to help some of the other veterans and people I know that are just suffering. And
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really encouraged that, like you were saying, that you were able to forgive him, because like in my whole thought process, like looking back, that is not the way that was not a default for me. I very much started with like, you guys did this to me type of mentality. I felt very alone. I closed myself off emotionally, and that just made me drink even more. And but to get through this, we need actually to have empathy and understanding and look into our parents and understand, oh, they're just passing down to us what was passed down to them. And I mean, you're saying that your dad might have had a good upbringing, and but the thing is, I mean, even with a positive upbringing, there might have been just gaps in the whole thing of processing trauma. And that's just kind of where that's the speed bump. That's the part that snags our shoe and trips us up, and we don't know what to do about it, and we just stay on the ground. And we just, and that's where we have kids. That's where we pass on our generations, and we say, how do we get back up and move forward? I don't know. I've been down on this floor for so long that this is just what I'm used to. So I mean, find your own way. But so there's a lot of signs for recognizing when you do need a change. Making yourself emotionally unavailable, and not communicating with people, closing yourself off, and it's like you're hiding from something. It's like it's interesting. It's interesting because all those days that I would just be drinking bottles and bottles, I never thought about going really internal with a sober mind and being just introspective and trying to break stuff down, understanding myself. Like, in one of the leadership traits of the Marine Corps is know yourself and seek self-improvement. I just wanted to escape. I wanted to escape myself, my life, my relationships. I didn't know what to do. And I feel very lucky or blessed with some type of glimpse of how things could have been better, and what else to do than to make that your mission when you're in a place like that. But
you had touched on this a little bit, but another, and I think this is a pretty common sign for people, and it's a pretty good indication you're going to need some change in your life. But you had talked about this a little bit, JK, but it's the concept of bad relationships with substances. You know what I mean? You don't want to sit with yourself. You don't want to sit with your thoughts. And so you need to use some kind of a substance in order to remove those thoughts. I mean, I used alcohol for years as a way to like kind of silence my thoughts in the evenings, so I'd, be mellow enough where I'd be able to sleep for the night. But it's like, I mean, you're destroying your liver, you're slowly killing yourself. And it's like, I mean, essentially it's like a socially acceptable form of suicide, and so it's just not going to get you anything good. Another one, and this I believe is so true for most veterans, and we talked about this briefly, but it is like the inability to be present. It's that we've been trained to focus on the things that happened in the past so we can improve ourselves in the future. And then we spend all our time focusing on the future because we've got to be prepared for whatever's coming. And it's like, at no point in time are you ever present enough to really like get yourself healthy. And you talked a little bit about the isolation, and I think this is really important to touch on. If you're not able to like love yourself, then I would argue that you're probably not able to, number one, receive love, and number two, genuinely give love to other people as well. And so if you don't like you, then you've already begun the dialogue about why people won't like you. So why would you go out and why would you spend time with people? You know what I mean? You're already casting your vote for like, hey, I'm unworthy and I'm not worth anything, so people wouldn't want to hang out with me. And so that's just kind of what you begin to accept, this isolated, smaller and smaller world, you know, where everything just kind of closes in until it's just you. And at that moment, you begin to realize, I haven't been doing any living. This has all just been survival, and that's killing me, you know? So it's just like a time bomb. You know. I'm sorry, what was that?
That's an awful mode. I just think that's an awful mode to be in the survive versus thrive mode. I've done some work at Stanford about how repatterning your brain, and sometimes it's like some of these spikes in it's kind of like that, the spike, I call it the brain spike, and that feedback, it can be triggered by anything that's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know, it goes off at all these times. You need that rush. It's a whole, I don't know. I've been studying about it too.
Yeah, well, we're actually going to talk a little bit about that later. We've actually have incorporated audio tools as a way to create a little bit of brainwave synchronization, maybe improve the productivity of your mind. And then I found that it makes it a lot easier to be introspective about things that would otherwise like kind of bring you to tears, you know. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's been a great tool. You had a comment, Alex, you wanted to go into. One of the things that you had mentioned earlier, and I think that we could also speak to as well, is that the default aggression. That when things get out of control, it's normally like an overly aggressive or an assertive response. That's the first response. You know, there's no attempt to mediate or to try to like come up with a solution. It's always just bark your way out of this corner. So Alex had something you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'm going through a book right now. It's pretty interesting. It has a couple dry spots, but it's actually, I do recommend it. It's called Articulations on the Utilization and Meaning of Psychedelics by Julian Palmer. Kind of a trippy little cover right here, but there's a couple of things in here that I recently read that they popped out to me, so I kind of wanted to just mention them real quickly. Right here it says, what scares us most perhaps are people who are violent and commit irrational acts without rhyme or reason, and who are often considered to be the very definition of evil. Another section right here next to it says, the inner self wants to come out and play, and the force of its desire to emerge implies acts of great violence or sudden irrationality. Yet the true nature of the self is ultimately creative and generative. Conscious intent and understanding of our own weaknesses rather than taking refuge in our strengths. Often this type of act will require a supportive framework of others around us who can at least try to understand our process and be present with us. So it definitely talks about like how that last part definitely talks about how community need people that could somewhat empathize and like help you work through this stuff, because it's not like it's an easy process. You're not going to come out of this unscathed, especially when you're deep into like bad habits with like substances or just lashing out and stuff like that. But I think we get worried about like the darkest part of ourselves, and when you're in that whole like flight or fight type of mentality, and you're in the real world, and you're sitting at home and you're surrounded by family, you're not present enough to find the peace in that moment. You're worried about the past or the future, and those types of experiences that you have, minor inconveniences or problems that you have that approach you instantly default into your reaction mode for something that was much more important, or like the stakes were much higher. And so you find yourself, you find a child in the kitchen dropping a dish and breaking it, and you find yourself just lashing out at them, breaking them down verbally or even physically. It's like you're applying the wrong medicine.
I think it's important to kind of understand where the aggression comes from or why it's there. Because I think if we appreciate like the evolutionary path we've been on, we go from hunter-gatherer to agrarian, and now we're living in cities. Violence was a pretty common part of life, so it's kind of innate for men to like seek it out. I think it's actually like a way for us to try to define our identities. The problem is, I think when you get in the military, in general, I think when you get in the military, there's too much of a commitment to violence for the identity. And then I know this is a fact. There's almost like zero spiritual connection for identity. And I think that's what really a lot of these guys are missing, is they have the connection with violence. They understand that part of their identity, but they're completely devoid of any realization that there's a spiritual aspect to themselves too, a spiritual part of their identity that they need to embrace and understand. Because I just think the complete lack of spirituality, it's almost like so many people in the West have almost completely severed their cord. And it's like spirituality now is like attendance at a weekly meeting, and that's not what it's supposed to be. That's not where you're going to get your identity. That's not where you're going to get happiness, so.
Totally. I totally agree with that, because I forget which type of training it was, but it was a month-long training operation. We were camping out, we were taking over like this fake mock, like fake town. And while we were there, we found a little bunny rabbit. And this is like in the desert, 29 Palms. And we found a little bunny rabbit, and I picked it up. And it was at the end of our exercise. So we're done training, we're wrapping up, we're grabbing our stuff. And I showed my squad leader this little rabbit I found. I'm like, look it. And he grabs it and he tosses it up as high as he can. And it falls, and it landed on its head and it died. When I look back at that, I'm like, this guy's trying to like harden us. But the whole point of like me joining the military, me walking into the recruiting office, was I'm willing to fight in order to protect what I see as good, my family, my friends, my loved ones, this way of life that I've appreciated and was brought up in, that I really love. And it kind of just like the culture, because my squad leader went to Iraq, and it's like by the time that he came into our unit, it's like he was already filed down into being just this emotionless person that's focused on killing and being okay with it and being able to push on through the mission and not have any problems with it. But I can't imagine where he might be now, as far as like grappling with that type of mental framework and coming back from it. Because I know since then he's had a young daughter and he's been raising her. So I'm not quite sure like what kind of positive things could come from that type of mental framework.
You forget how to live when you're there. You forget what's funny, you forget what to laugh at, you forget what's normal, and you're just prepared to do anything. It's just not a good place to be. It's not where we're supposed to be. It's not normal. So yeah, absolutely. But how do you get away from that? And I think that's kind of some of what we were hoping to discuss now, is like, my goodness, there's actual tools that you could use to help maybe process some of this trauma. Not just one,
right,
not just two, but several of them. One of the first ones that I would recommend to anybody is just basic introspection. You know what I mean? Close your eyes, stop being so distracted, go inward, take a little time to think about what happened. I know for me that one of the most meaningful meditations I ever did was a meditation where like I was deliberately going in to try to like understand my parents and what happened to me. And I remember like having this vision of myself like on the ground, and I'm getting hit, and I'm like pulling myself out of my body, and I'm looking down at myself while I'm on the ground. And it was from that perspective that I was able to see the pain that my parents had experienced that led them to treat a kid like that. And so introspection is a great tool. After that, I was able to like basically like talk to this younger version of myself and explain to him, Brian, I've got you. It's okay. I'm big and strong now. No one's going to hurt you. They're not going to like take advantage of you, and you're okay. You're good to go. And it was like 1,000 pounds of ice melted off of me. You know what I mean? I just felt so much lighter. And it was just like, the sense of angst that I'd constantly been living with, this like sense of disenfranchisement and disillusion about my life, just like melted away. I just had this incredible amount of empathy and grace for these people who'd done bad things to me. But I understood. It's like, it's beginning to appreciate there's a reason why people do everything that they do, even the bad stuff. And it's taking the time to understand, how did you get to that place where this was your go-to decision? This is what fundamentally seemed right to you. And in that process, I found freedom. I found the rest of my story that I didn't know. I began to realize that I had this story that I'd been a part of, and it wasn't just my story, it was my family's story. And I'd completely cut that off for myself. I denied my family's story in my life. And so for me, getting introspective, going back and understanding how it is that, a guy like me ends up in the place that I'm at, it was an incredibly rewarding process for me to go through. But that can be hard for a lot of people, because a lot of people, the very thing they don't want to do is close their eyes and think about the bad stuff that's happened. So that's one tool I'd recommend, but I can see some of the concerns. Another one is yoga. That's a great way to improve. I mean, just small changes to your health. Improving your health is a great way to begin to make change. I mean, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but like small changes have incredible compound effects in your life. You know, it's not about doing anything too big or too jarring. It's about just making small incremental changes that you can live with and you can continue with, you know.
Just for you were saying like introspection, were you able to sit down and be introspective before like using any type of audio recording assistance type of stuff? Because I couldn't. I would go to like
No,
different
in
meditative
fact,
places.
Here's one of the biggest problems with post-traumatic stress disorder is you are tricking yourself in almost every situation and every environment that you have to react to what's happening around you. And normally that sense that you have to react is what you feel right before you make some top-down terrible decision where you're in a default mode and you're just copying other people, and it'll normally lead to some really negative, events in your life. You know, it's not going to get you the results you want. Rather than like diplomatically trying to address a problem, now you're barking out like a lady at Wendy's for getting something wrong. It's just like a total misapplication of effort, and it's not going to get you any of the results that you want. So yeah, I think that for me, when I began to introduce the HemiSync stuff, and that's just the binaural beats, what I noticed was when I would get into situations that would normally create conflict in me, I would just sit there and I would say to myself, I actually don't have to do anything right now, and I'm just watching all this stuff go on. And it was just such a weird way to approach living. Because I mean, I don't know your father, but I'd wager that he might be pretty reactionary to things. That when stuff happens, he almost seems to have to like slow down and think about what he's doing and figure out whether or not that default response was the right thing to do. I don't know, but I know that was very true for me. Like you just find yourself responding to things as though it's like you're in combat and someone's shooting at you and it's life or death. And so you've got to make your decision quick, and then you defend that decision to the death, and normally that can have really, really negative consequences for your personal relationships. I know that was true for me.
Yeah. And for you guys, if you haven't heard of HemiSync before, basically it's just, you can find it on any platform as far as like free audio. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube has them. They have some recordings, but there's a couple of different groups that
make called?
The one that we were talking about is called HemiSync, HEMI-SYNC. And so there's a couple of different groups that do similar things. Binaural Beats. Basically, they make an audio recording, and you have to use headphones or have both ears plugged in to the sound. And there's a phenomena called frequency following response, and your brain will actually tune itself to the frequencies that it's hearing. So if you're having trouble driving and you're on the freeway driving through the night, just the gentle hum of the car is actually putting you into like a sleep state. So they design these audio recordings so that when you listen to them, it's tricking your mind into going to a state of meditation. So I was trying to do these introspection meditations by myself, and people would say that I have monkey mind because I would sit there in silence and get nowhere. And actually, Brian was the one that showed this to me and brought it to me. And when I started using those, I'd lay down for maybe like 20 minutes or so. And after roughly that amount of time, you're able to, and this is after repeated use, just like practicing it, you're able to click into these states of meditation and kind of work through what you got going on. And time goes kind of slow there when you're into that state. And it's incredible like how much processing you could actually get through in like 10 or 15 minutes of just like introspection, working on yourself. So I wouldn't even be here like if Brian didn't show me these types of audio recordings that I could look into and have some time, because it just sets your mind and primes it for that type of interaction as far as introspection. So highly recommend that. In yoga is, I know it, a lot of people don't really care for it, and I definitely see it now that I've done yoga for a little bit. I definitely see it as like the baseline, as like the minimum that people should do, because it's definitely like getting deep stretching in and like basically getting to the edge of your range of motion, what your body could do. But it doesn't have to be so strenuous. So it could be somewhat like a small child could do it all the way through life, and an old person could do it. And it, there's all these types of modifications. So it's like a simple way to get into fitness if you haven't, because when I got out of the military, I put away all those habits of discipline. I was just drinking and sticking to myself. So it's not like I was working out really ever after I got out, and I became a couch potato. And it's like I needed something to get me back into it, because if I was going to go hard, I was going to lose interest really quick, and I was going to break that. And it wasn't going to stick around long enough to even be a positive habit. And another thing about yoga that I like is that for every movement that you do, it's either a breath in or a breath out. And so when you're going through a flow, maybe not necessarily like watching a video or in a class, you might be able to get those if you have like a good teacher. But if you're just flowing, just doing movements and keeping in that pattern of breath in, breath out, it totally helps dial you in, making you present. What's going on with your body? Your muscle is strained right in your calf or whatever, your mind goes there, and you're able to do a little diagnostic check on what's going on in your body. And that's always beneficial too, because it's like all these different things, all these different forms of introspection need to come together into like a trinity, like a holy trinity, if you will, as far as the body, mind, and spirit. So you definitely want to, there's all these different types of tools to kind of help you become used to being conscious of yourself. And we benefited greatly from them. So we definitely want to mention those. So, and again, going back to knowing yourself and seeking self-improvement, improving your health is a great way to start, because you're setting a foundation. And so it's like a good launch pad for the other ways that you through your insights find ways to improve yourself. And if your body's ready to go, then if you're fit for a change, then it's going to come that much more easily. How about like fasting from habits, taking breaks? Not necessarily cold turkey, because that seems to be a little bit some people could do it, but it's for me, taking breaks from drinking, that helped me dial it back a little bit. How about fear or hate mongering media on like social medias, Brian? Taking breaks from stuff like that.
That's the news.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, you got to watch out for the news. You got to understand it's not news. It's propaganda that's meant to get you all worked up and afraid. I mean, it's just
you guys, he's worked up all the time. I wanted to mention one thing. Speak to your point, Brian. You did say he's it's like always in a state of reaction.
Yeah.
Like always in a state, not just responding, no, just always reactive.
Feeling like you need to do something. Yeah.
Like always. And this man, he's done well in life. He has all the other tools, but financially now, but I'm talking about the ones you guys mentioned, that sense of spirituality, lots of things. Yeah. I'm healing along with him. I mean, I go a lot quicker because I'm out. I'm a lot younger, and I'm out finding, always seeking the best, but I'm trying to usher in some things. I was trying, I can put things up and set up conversations where there is introspection, and walk away and give him that time and that silence. It's just, man, I'm really struggling here with not lack of education in other realms that help you be a successful human being to survive, right? Like financially or whatever. But I'm talking about, I don't want to say it like there's an ignorance. How am I going to get a 75-year-old person? I'm never going to get him to meditate ever.
Yeah, I know. Good luck. Yeah.
There's just some things, but I can do some of the practice breathing. He respects and honors that I've studied medicine. So I have just started with encouragement to get massages, and I'll also do some of it, and not just like, oh, you got a massage. I do all the pressure points. I do energy healing myself. I do it for others. So I'm trying, but I'm listening. I'm trying to write a plan for him and put it all together.
Yeah.
Just because.
Well, I would really encourage you, to maybe, I mean, for you, I would encourage you to maybe check out some Alan Watts, because it sounds like you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, and you know what I mean? Like, that's just going to rob you of your joy.
I'm on limited time. I have a big, I'm on a limited time.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. I mean, at the end of the day, I got to a point where I was looking around and I just realized the lessons that I'd been handed were not serving me well. And that's the problem. If you're successful in this life monetarily, I mean, my father was successful monetarily, and I feel the exact same thing you do. It's like the guy's got zero spiritual connection, and he's convinced that meditation is like what you do right before you worship the devil. So it's like, okay, what do you do from here?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's a tough cookie. Yeah.
I think the only way that he would ever do that is if I formally went back and became, MJKMD.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and it could happen very, I could make it happen, but it's just, I'm just trying to think of these strategies, because I do believe it starts with, I'm an extension. Your children, I don't know if you all have children, but your children are an extension of you, right?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
And now that I'm in that awareness, I want to share it with him and have that grace and bring it to him.
Yeah.
I told you guys, I mentioned that he came back. He obviously, his friends were blown up in front of him,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a glass eye. He just, after us really not pressuring him feeling safe enough to go get it repaired. I think he ended his like in his late 20s. He had the same glass eye, and you can imagine that it was faded and.
Oh yeah, he's
right?
not taking care of himself. He's not caring for himself. Yeah.
And it's because he didn't want to go. I don't think he wanted to open that part of his mind.
Mm-hmm.
But he finally felt safe enough to find someone that did it, and some of those parts of healing himself, and right.
Yeah.
So it's really one thing I always say to him is like, I see the world through the eyes that you gave me. And we have these big, beautiful green eyes, and I just tell him that, and he smiles, and it's an encouragement. So I really appreciate all the insights that you guys have given me today.
I'm actually going to post a link in the chat. This is a Spotify playlist that I put together. If you don't have Spotify, all this stuff's available on like Amazon. You could just get it off YouTube if you want. But this is actually a list of some of the music that I listen to. And when I first started doing this, I was not meditating at all. I come from a very Judeo-Christian background. I already told you a little bit about my dad. So this is like completely out of character for my family. But I was just sitting at my desk with both my headphones in. I work as a paralegal right now, and I was just doing my paralegal work with these headphones in, and it's just playing, just nice sounds, no words, just nice sounds. And that is where I began to notice that I was less reactionary. It wasn't through the meditation; it was actually just through listening to the music. So maybe that might be something you could get him to maybe incorporate, maybe like 20 minutes of just like listening to some music. You can do whatever you want, but just consider like adding this to your daily regimen. I mean, I can speak to the fact I'm a combat veteran, very reactionary, done really crazy stuff when I got home in response to just very mild situations. And this stuff was like, it was like the medicine I needed and didn't even know existed. It's just, your brain is just so chaotic. There is so much going on. It is just so confusing out there. And our ego is tricking us into thinking we've got this, baby. It's going to be okay. We're doing great. It's like, none of that's what's happening. We got to be honest with ourselves about where we are.
Excellent.
Yeah, on that playlist as well, one of the I think it's one of the top recordings is called Wave 1, and that one is more of a guided meditation. I would recommend checking that out even yourself, because the guy, before it even kicks off, really, he's explaining like the technology, or just like why this works. He's explaining it in like terms of science, of like why it's been validating what's going on, and it's really interesting to get that right before going into the meditation. And he takes you through like a brief guided meditation, and really seeing how you feel after it. Because when I come out of it, I definitely felt, to say the least, present. And that was new for me. It sucks to try to wake someone up from either being in a depression, worrying about the past, or anxieties, worrying about the future. But I make up like a mental image of your dad being maybe like upset about something. But right here, right now, in our own home, like things aren't bad. We could build off of this. We're doing okay, and it's just where our minds go to, and we just need to fix that default mode network of just, again, like what Brian was saying, like our reactions to things. And so I feel like I just can't. My mind just gets so solidified in the idea that being present that's where we find how we go about this, is being genuine, our genuine self, and being present. Go ahead.
Present. Yeah.
And the big issue with being reactionary is very rarely is your reaction appropriate for the situation. Normally when you're reactionary, you're engaging in about some of the most basic top-down thinking you can engage in. And so you're guaranteed to rely on things that you've used before in order to manage situations. And when you have that combat experience, like, I mean, the Marine Corps talks about this, it's like violence of action is what you need to apply to most situations. You need to hit them aggressively, you need to hit them hard. And if that doesn't work, hit them harder. You know, it's like, that doesn't translate very well into healthy relationships. I mean, I have 2 daughters, so I really appreciate your commentary. I mean, I'm getting healthier, so I'm not going to be this person for them. You know what I mean? The person my dad was. I'd like to, you know, be different and have them go out into the world as healthy, happy people that know how to process trauma and not hurt people that don't even know if their parents love them. Because I think that's the truth for a lot of people. They get out of their homes and they're like, shit, man, what was that? Did those people even like me? You know, and that's a pretty terrible way to enter the world.
Yeah, it's interesting how just having this conversation, that it's like, it feels to me, I don't have any children of my own. It feels like a lot of parents will go through life trying to protect their children, and that's about where the protection ends, instead of sitting down with them in a situation after something happens, someone dies, what have you, and actually from a young age equipping them with how to process and sit with them and work them through it. Because life is pain, in a sense. You know, it's not, you're not going to go through life and not suffer, unless you're maybe sitting down in a monastery for your entire life. But like,
that can be suffering in and of itself, though. I mean, life is
that's
dualistic.
true.
If you experience a drop of joy, you're going to suffer for it. It's just how it works, you know.
Exactly.
Learn to embrace them and learn the lesson.
Yeah. So I feel like it's like a forgotten art that's not really applied, and people kind of it just goes over their head. They try to just, you know, make as much money as they can and provide as much as they can as like a form of protection. But just the mental processing of things, not so much the physical fortification, but the mental fortification is something that's been neglected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So something we need about, as far as fixing ourselves, we need to be critical about how we use our time, right? We need to change what we consume if we're looking to change ourselves for the better. We need to make better habits. We need to live deliberately. So we need to ask ourselves, do our habits serve us? Do these things that we naturally do when we come home, or just how we act on our free time?
I was gonna say, when you're considering habits, don't just think of them as negative things. Think about them as things you do habitually. You know what I mean? I think we put a pejorative on habits, but the truth of it is, like 90% of our day is all habits. You know, it's just some of them aren't destroying our lives, so we treat them like they're not bad. But yeah, I mean, it's about being critical of like the grooves that we're in, understanding the rut that we're in, and whether or not we really want to be in this rut right now. You know, and I don't think that a lot of us take time. I mean, we just keep going back to this theme. We just don't take time to be critical about where we are. We trick ourselves into thinking everything's going great. We got this. It's wonderful. The truth is, we need to spend a little bit of time being introspective, because that deep innate sense of dissatisfaction you feel, that's going to catch up with you someday.
Yeah, well, you know what? It might just continue in that way to the very end, and it's like your life turns into this trudging. You're surviving your life. You're not living. You're just surviving what you got, and you're just waiting until the end, almost trying to make the pain.
That's pretty much a constant theme with veterans. You know, just surviving until the end. You know, just complete the mission. Complete the mission. It doesn't matter if you're having fun or you're enjoying yourself. Just complete the mission, and life becomes the mission. And it's like, that's no way to live.
No.
Yeah.
There's so much more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
So
mean, the truth of it is, and that was my realization, is if you just want to set yourself to surviving, that will kill you someday. That's just all there is to it. It will kill you. It's like, that's a miserable way to live, man. It's hard living, and you shouldn't have to do it. Yeah, but this is the part, though. I mean, when in your life did you learn to actively pursue a positive mindset? You know, when did your parents take time to say, hey, you know what, you can take a bad day and you can turn it around into a good day, and this is how you do it? You know, I mean, I remember my childhood is normally just like a series of accusations that I already knew how to do stuff that I didn't know how to do. You know, it's like, okay, I guess I know how to do this. Fine. You know, so it's like we come from homes where we're not getting the instruction that we need, and we're now rubbing shoulders with a bunch of people who very likely didn't get the instructions that they need, and we're all trying to put on appearances and make it seem like we're healthy people, and we're not healthy people. We're confused, we're dissatisfied, and we're looking for meaning and purpose.
Yeah, And that's being positive, I think, is almost like the tricky part of a veteran finding their way out of just running amok, or just the situation that they found themselves in. Because it's like, how can, with so much aggression and negativity, what reason do they have to think positively and to try to turn some stuff around? So it's like, how are you supposed to focus on growth if you're just down on yourself and you can't just wait till you get home and start drinking?
Well, and if you don't have a future, if you don't have anything meaningful that you're looking forward to in your life other than your death, then the truth of it is like you're probably not making investments into yourself. You're probably not developing skills. You're just, like you said, slowly trudging your way through this life, waiting to get to the end, you know. And it's essential to make investments in yourself. If you're investing any time in anybody else, you need to be investing that time in yourself as well. You know, I mean, if you're not healthy and whole and complete, then you're not going to have anything of meaning or value to give to people. It's going to be like some corrupted, you know, counterfeit. You know, it's not really who you are. And I think that's really why so many people begin to feel so much dissatisfaction after living with PTSD for so long, is you know that this isn't the life that you're supposed to be living. This isn't who you are. This isn't who you are inside. This is like emotional scarring that's now become manifest in your daily activities. And it's like, what do you do?
It's like an emotional quick reaction force that never got called off duty. They just
Exactly,
they just stayed on their post.
One of those Japanese soldiers in World War II that's still fighting the war, you know, 63, and has no idea that Japan surrendered. You know, it's
Right.
like that. I feel like there's a lot of veterans when they get back, they just don't understand the current state of the war or whether or not we're at peace. And so they live like they're at war. And it's, I mean, when you're a family and you're living with somebody who lives like they're at war, that's a pretty terrible person to be around, you know? So I think that's the big thing, is just understanding that, like, when you choose to not be present, there are negative consequences to that for everyone who's around you. It's not just you, it's the ripples that you create in everybody else's life too. You know, so I think that's an important thing to consider. And I mean, that kind of moves us right into the most important aspect. And this is the really big one, and this is the hard one. You have to know your trauma. You have to go back and take time to understand it. I mean, the way that I would explain, you know, kind of my process of getting healthier was, it was like when I would go inward, it was like I was this tangled knot of confusion in this cluttered and chaotic environment. And there were these obstacles that were impossible to get over them. But when I started like meditating and getting healthier and being less reactionary, I stopped seeing obstacles I couldn't get over, and I began to see objects that I could just choose to walk around. And all these things that define me as this cluttered, tangled knot of a person were actually just a whole bunch of experiences that I'd never taken time to really understand what had happened or why it had happened. And once I began to go back and take time just to understand it and not be so afraid of these things that had happened to me, because they are things that are part of my story, and I went back to try to understand them, it's like this process of knowing yourself. I can't, I mean, I hate to put a pie in the sky kind of claim on it, but it's like, as you begin to know yourself, who you truly are, and understand the trauma that you've been through, it becomes so empowering. It's not even funny. You're like, you mean to tell me that as everybody else has been walking around like a normal human being, for the last 15 years, I've been hopping around on one leg, acting like this is normal, and I can use both my legs now? And it's like, it's so easy to begin living your life, but you need to have that realization that you're handicapping yourself by not addressing your trauma. And it's like getting people to connect those dots. That's the work right there. Helping people to understand that there is a part of them that they are rejecting, and that they need to go back and understand that trauma and embrace it, because it's their story. They're going to be an incomplete person unless they can understand their story. You know, that pushes off into some of the family stuff I was talking about earlier, because the truth is your parents' story is kind of what you're continuing right now. You're a living testament to who they were, and you need to appreciate and understand what went into making you. And that's going back, and a lot of times for a lot of American homes, it's addressing trauma, because we come from homes that are highly secretive. We tell each other lies that things are normal when they're not normal. And when bad things happen, more often than not, we say, well, don't do that again. Whatever you did that made that happen, don't do that again. And all of a sudden, the victim is turned into like the perpetrator. They're the people that are at fault. You know, so I just think that we in a lot of families traditionally, I don't think there's a lot of effort put into helping people understand how to process painful things. Instead, I think they spend time minimizing the painful stuff and reminding you about great granddaddy who fought in World War II, or your great great grandfather who fought in World War I. He had it bad. This isn't bad. Smack. And it's just like, what are you talking about? This is terrible. So I think there's a lot of betrayal early in the home, and I think a lot of it prevents us from being able to have a very candid view on our trauma. And the truth of it is, that's what you're going to have to go back and uncover in order to start living your whole life.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, it might be hard to get introspective about where this all started, especially if the snowball started rolling during when your grandpa was a young kid or something like that. You know, just when it's just so many generations before you. And it's I don't, you know, I've been grappling with just like this whole concept of trauma and how to deal with it. And it's like everyone who goes through trauma, that trauma is going to echo through their life and go into later generations unless they deliberately do something about it. And so like maybe JK, like with you, like this is something that you're seeing like with your dad. And so you're trying to end it now before it leaks into other parts of other people's lives. And like,
Well,
go
I'm
ahead.
seeing it with him, and I'm also seeing it in myself. And it's time to heal it all.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing it in my siblings, all of us actually.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to, you know,
Right. They might have to address it
I'm trying to
themselves.
usher him, you know, into this change. It's hard. You guys are so absolutely correct about all this stuff. I'm just like,
Everyone that suffers through it has to either let it pass on to other people, or they got to end it. It's like one of those two choices. It either continues or you have to stop it. But you have to stop it intentionally, deliberately, and it's through introspection and understanding yourself and how you got here. And that's when you're able to open up and see that your parents or whoever passed it down to you, they're not the bad guy. And that's where you kind of have to address it with like empathy and love. And it's like these people had the exact same scenario happen to them, happened to me. It's just a new season of the same show. You need to approach it that way. Because I mean, if you start pointing the finger and saying you did this to me, and it's like, well, I did it to you because my parents were neurotic and dropped me, and that they were like that because they got dropped too. And it's like it just becomes a thing of passing the buck. We just need to understand that we're all kind of the same in the way that we've been dealing with these traumas, whether we pass it to each other or not. And it's just learning how to handle it. And then being able to continue and to live a good life, live well after suffering instead of bringing it with you.
And the learning how to handle it part, that's a real big one. I mean, we've talked about tools and everything like that, but at the end of the day, the most important thing that you could apply to your life, and this is almost like a guaranteed way to try to get yourself to be present, it's just like a great tactic or tool, it's focused breathing. I mean, when you're intentionally breathing through your nose and you're putting your effort into inhale, exhale, you're being present in that moment, you know, because normally unconsciously you're breathing. When you're actively trying to breathe, this is like an example of you beginning to engage in presence, you know. So when you find yourself in an environment where triggers are going off, or you feel like you need to respond to a stressor, or you need to react to a situation, probably the best thing you could do is just take a nice few deep breaths through your nose and give yourself a little bit of time to process the situation. I mean, I cannot explain to you the importance, the correlation between breathing and with being present. You know, when you're actively breathing through your nose, not unconsciously through your mouth, it is just a way just to ground you in an immediate sense and just to focus yourself and to give yourself an opportunity to maybe react appropriately instead of just reacting. You know, this process of top-down thinking maybe slows down a little bit, and now you have an opportunity to maybe do some real thinking.
Right, and I think that is definitely the first step before incorporating something. Hey, this is a Portland Psychedelic Society, so I'd be remiss to leave out the idea of psychedelics. And those are a great tool for introspection. But if you don't know what to do with that state of mind when you get there, you're just going to get lost in the psychotropic effects, and it's just going to be like an interesting trip that you don't get anything out of, and then it's going to be gone. So, but
yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, and that's what I really dig about entheogens. And we keep talking about the ego and how we trick ourselves and all this kind of stuff. That's where the entheogens come in, because the entheogens have this magical ability to take your ego, which is running the show all the time and convincing you that everything's good to go or that it's not good to go, whatever. It's creating your perspective of this reality. That sucker just gets slipped into the background with entheogens. And this allows you to, rather than viewing the world through a protective ego view, to maybe view the world through a much more detached and realistic view. And once you begin to do that, you begin to realize, like we were talking about earlier, things are actually pretty good right now. You know what I mean? Maybe I don't need to be in this constant state of anxiety and depression. Maybe I don't have a lot to worry about right now. Maybe I can just be at peace. Maybe I can just be okay. You know, and so for me, that's kind of been the process, you know?
Yeah, it's such a beneficial tool if you know how to start working on yourself. it's just that addition has just been so
Great
beneficial.
supplements. Yeah.
Yeah.
I use that as a tool for myself. I don't know when the time and place to introduce it would be, but I see it in the future. My mom had that courtesy for me in allowing to use, psychedelics as a tool to help in her healing. But Dad is always just kind of on a different level.
One approach you might want to consider is, a completely organic approach would be potentially microdosing mushrooms, where you wouldn't have any effect whatsoever, but the mycelium would be having positive effects on his, overall body function. So that might be an approach where it wouldn't be looking for like a nice, or like essentially a trip. It would almost be like a medicine to add to a daily regimen kind of thing. But I've done that before, and I found it to be pretty cool, pretty helpful.
Yeah, that might be an easy way to slip into it, because just the psilocybin, just its effect on the mind, even at a microdose level, is they go into it in more in depth in like documentaries and stuff. Like Fantastic Fungi is a great one, but like how your default mode network is almost not so much reset, but you're not falling so easily and hard into old habits. So you after applying it a couple of times, having them get used to it, then you start reopening up some old stuff, and he might not have the same reaction as he would normally default. But like I said, it's psychedelics. People I've heard some people say easy mode or whatever. It's the work still needs to be done. You need to address and be with your trauma. You need to look and understand it, understand yourself, and why it had such an effect on you to get you to where you are now. And that's not going to be easy.
And just to touch on something like this, just occurred to me with your dad that this might be a reality or another impediment to him being open to entheogens. Keep in mind, the man fought in Vietnam, and the people that were protesting Vietnam and were like, showering veterans with urine when they got off the airplanes.
Yeah, he told me
at airports.
Spinning on people.
Yeah, these are the people that were pushing for entheogens. So I could see how there'd already be a pejorative just based on the source. You know what I mean? These are the people that were, like I said, engaging in entheogens. And so I could see that as an alternative factor why he might want to have nothing to do with it. So that's another thing to consider too. And that might be a good topic of conversation with them, just to openly admit and be like, what's it like, having to go through that, and potentially understanding that this might be something that could help you, just being honest and being transparent with him and giving him the space to be honest and transparent too. He may not give you an answer, but at least he asked the question. At least you cared enough to think about what it must have been like.
Right. I think sometimes we think introspection is only prompted by the individual taking responsibility and doing it. But I think sometimes prompting questions given in a very gentle way, and that time and that space allowed for the person to process it.
Yeah.
It's kind of almost like a catalyst. I'm doing a lot of work in the field of healing, and it's so amazing some of the things that you can start and help people to do with that initial part that you guys had suggested, introspection.
Yeah.
Well, you had outlined that it's introspection is that point where you start.
Well, and also just consider he may have had a great childhood. I'm not saying there's any abuse or, any, serious trauma or negligence there. But at the end of the day, the question is, was he taught to do these things when he was younger? Did his father or mother teach him how to be introspective? Did they teach him that it was important? And if they didn't, then, this is like your starting ground. It's to understand that like he comes from a home where none of this was emphasized. In fact, a lot of them, you might be considered a shiftless layabout if you spend an hour meditating. There's work to be done.
Yeah, there's always work to be. That's what they always know. There's work to be done. Yeah. Or come on, you're tougher than that.
And you're just trying to get healthy, and they're tearing you down by minimizing what you're going through. And it's like, I need some time to get better, guys.
I want everybody to get better. I really want people to get the word out and help heal a lot of these gentlemen in the military that suffer in this silence, where they don't want to, right? They don't want to open that can of worms. I think there's an embarrassment. I don't know why, but I always feel from here there's an embarrassment.
And frankly, I've got my theory about this. I think that after World War I and World War II, the archetype of the fighting man got lionized in a very inappropriate way. And basically everybody else who's fought in the war since then has been in the shadow of heroes. And you'll never be able to live up to what those veterans did. You know what I mean? And so I know personally from having been to a few VFWs and, you know, veterans halls and stuff like that, after Vietnam, the World War II vets did not accept the Vietnam vets. There was quite a bit of contention between them. A lot of the World War II vets did not believe that Vietnam vets were actually fighting the good war like they'd fought. So you're dealing with that too. You're coming back to a community of these heroes, and they don't really want to have much to do with you.
Yeah, it's I think for introspection, it comes back down to settling into understanding yourself. What changes would best serve you, and how to move forward. You need to consider, like, what do you want for yourself and the aversions to that path that you want, and figuring out what's stopping you. You need to know yourself and seek self-improvement, like I mentioned before. You need to reconcile these things though with like love and understanding. It's not so much separateness and hate.
That goes back to the empathy. I mean, empathy is the most critical ingredient for all of this. Take a little time to wear their shoes and imagine what that must have been like. You know what I mean? It makes it a lot easier to be you.
So we kind of been hinting at it, but with like all this sitting down and being introspective, the importance of patience. Importance of patience.
And the big one there, I mean, normally whenever you hear somebody talk about being patient, it's always about being patient with others. You know what I mean? No, be patient. They're just taking care of this, or this is going on. But fundamentally, I can say what I believe a lot of veterans have, I know that I had a huge deficit here, is it's patience with yourself. You know what I mean? It's understanding that like failure is part of the process, and you're going to fail at things, but then you're going to have the opportunity to learn from that failure and move forward. And I don't think that that's necessarily the mindset that most veterans have. I think veterans, I mean, for me, I remember failure. Failure is what happens before you lose a war. Like failure is what happens before you die. It's like you're not accustomed to accepting these things in your life. You're not accustomed to having bad things happen. And because you're not accustomed, you don't understand the importance of maintaining a positive attitude. Because when you start getting negative about your life, man, that's going to have some real bad consequences. You need to have the ability to maintain a positive attitude about yourself, because if you can't be positive about you, nobody else can be positive about you. So that's like probably one of the biggest things. I mean, this is where I would just encourage people to act as if, even if you're not feeling positive, just try to eliminate all negative talk, any of that kind of stuff, any of like being down on yourself, any tearing yourself down, anything where you're dismissive. Just get rid of that talk. I mean, it's just the absolute worst thing you could do for yourself. I mean, you're literally like creating your own bad waves for yourself. So I would just encourage people, be patient, be positive. Change is slow, but it will come.
Yeah, and you can't let like failures discourage you. I mean, it's life. It's from the beginning to the end. There's a long time, hopefully, for you to be able to work out the kinks. But like I said, these traumas, these problems we have with ourselves, we get into that default mode, and we go about the same way of dealing with them, whether it's drinking or what have you. And it's like they echo through our life. Life is a series of tests, and it's going to echo because it's like you're being retested. It's being brought back to you again. And if you're going to continue to handle it the same way, which is not very beneficial to your well-being, your state of mind, your family, if you're not going to learn that lesson, then you're going to repeat the same mistake. You need to do a little dissecting into these things that you have such a problem with. So it is again, it's not an easy thing, but it's worth it. Living life deliberately, not just surviving your life. Living well. We have every opportunity. We're home. You know, it's available to us. We just need to be in the right mindset to be able to feel that we deserve it.
The big thing is it needs to come from a place of forgiveness, you know, and it's not just about forgiving others. It's very largely about forgiving yourself. At the end of the day, if you've experienced trauma at the hands of someone else, you experience some form of betrayal, because we're not supposed to be treating each other like that. We should be kind and empathetic towards each other. So there's a betrayal there. But the problem is that when you chose to continue living that trauma and not processing that trauma, you began to betray yourself. And it's important to take time to forgive yourself for that. You know, I mean, you only know what you know. And I think that just in general, there needs to be a strong air of forgiveness and empathy as you get ready to go into this, because you've made mistakes and they've made mistakes, because mistakes are just part of this life. And if you're making mistakes, it means you're alive. So it's just kind of how it goes, man. You know, just a lot more grace, a lot more forgiveness, a lot more empathy, and a lot more openness and acceptance.
How empowering is it when you're doing something like this, but you also are building slightly like a community, or just like have peers that are in that same process, helping to keep you on track? It's just, I can't tell you how, I mean, you and I, Brian, just working through this stuff together using basically everything that we've been talking about today. Like, I feel like if I was doing this on my own, I wouldn't have made it this far. You know,
Yeah,
I just feel
community is
like,
essential. Yeah, community is essential. We didn't cover it in here, but we should have given it more time. It is just absolutely vital that you find people that are positive and you surround yourself with them. That whole negativity thing I was talking about yourself, it's the exact same way with your friends. If you got friends that are just speaking nothing but negative stuff out into the world, I mean, guys, you got to be positive. I mean, if you can't be positive about your life, nobody else will be. It's just you craft your own destiny. You got to be positive. And if you can envision a life where you suffer and you have PTSD and you have a small community and you don't go out and do anything, well, then you can also envision a life where you don't suffer as much, where you do go out and where you do have community. And it'd probably be better to start spending more time thinking about that.
thank you
Yeah,
guys
thank
very
you
much
guys.
for joining us.
I
Yeah,
want to
thank you very
thank
much.
you again for your time and your intelligence, and I really appreciate it. You guys have just given me so many tools and just kind of this grounding. I wanted to mention one thing. I think sometimes when you hear somebody express their trauma and you get started in the process, a simple saying to them almost so that they can start on that forgiveness for themselves. I'm sorry that you had to experience that. Meaning I'm sorry that you had to carry that anger and that
Yes. Yeah.
sadness for so long. And I always make sure, and I make certain to do it with others and different types of trauma caused by, wars and different things. But I think that saying that I'm sorry is so powerful to them, letting them know it's okay.
It's a great way to model empathy for people who might not have ever really experienced much empathy in their life.
Right. And it goes back to that point. No one ever taught us how to deal with trauma, the words, the ways to start, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I always feel like that recognition, that initial spark is really what always needs to be created. So those other, you can get into that introspection component.
Yeah. Carl Rogers, I think, was the psychiatrist, but it's like the humanistic approach. I mean, basically, we all have like very meaningful stories and real experiences, and it's up to us to treat each other like they were valuable, and to appreciate what happened and understand. And you're right, at the appropriate time, say, "Man, I'm really sorry that happened to you. It wasn't supposed to be like that." Letting them know that it can be different. So definitely, yeah, I appreciate that. Just want to thank you guys all for your time and for being present. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we'll be talking again next month.
Excellent. Have a wonderful day and happy Father's Day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, take care.
All right, bye.